This film was originally conceived as a dark horror movie, but it became a comedy. Interestingly, this transformation was insisted upon by the director, who had previously only worked on horror films. To keep the movie feeling fresh, it was given a retro style. Quite the paradox. Movies Inside Out presents. The Mask is a 1994 comedy based on the comic book series of the same name. How did Freddy Krueger influence the plot? What deeper meaning is embedded in it? And how did Jim Carrey save the producers $1 million? Find the answers to these questions in our new video. The creation story. In 1989, representatives from Dark Horse Comics first approached New Line Cinema with a request to adapt the comic The Mask. The project faced several delays, and the main character went through various changes. However, each new version retained the dark tone and exaggerated violence of the original comic. New Line Cinema also intended to make a horror film, so they offered the director's chair to Chuck Russell, who had only directed horror films before. But Russell found the violence in the comic too off-putting and proposed making the movie less dark and more family-friendly. Moreover, if everything were done according to the original comics, it would have resulted in another Freddy Krueger, and Russell had just directed the third installment of A Nightmare on Elm Street. According to the director, there was a real battle over what the film would become, but Russell's vision ultimately prevailed. The character of Stanley Ipkiss from the comics and the film share only a streak of bad luck. The animated character was vengeful and violent, and these traits were passed on to the film's specially created antagonist, Dorian Tyrell.
You said you wouldn't hurt him!
I lied.
Meanwhile, Stanley on screen appeared shy and immature. Lieutenant Kellaway's character also differs significantly between the comic and the film. Canonically, he was respectable and compassionate, while in the movie, he became sharper and grimmer. Tina Carlisle doesn't exist in the comics. She partly replaced Stanley's original ex-girlfriend, Kathy. To substitute for her, the dog Milo was also introduced. Interestingly, in the comic, Kathy dons the mask after Stanley, and in one of the earlier script drafts, the film ended with Stanley's friend and colleague, Charlie, wearing the mask. Chuck Russell wanted the film to be timeless, so he abandoned the initial idea of a futuristic style. Instead, he opted for a retro approach. Paradoxically, a 1940s-style film looked fresher at the time. Even now, the mask remains timeless. The creators aim to showcase the duality of human nature. In life, we wear masks in front of others, often quite different from who we really are. Similarly, Stanley sees himself as a repressed, hopeless romantic. But with the mask, he becomes a playful trickster.
It's incredible. With these powers, I could be a superhero!
Following this same logic, Tina initially appears to be a typical femme fatale, but eventually forgets her schemes and genuinely falls in love. Dorian, in contrast, starts as an ordinary, unremarkable lawbreaker and becomes increasingly violent as the film progresses. And Peggy seems like a law-abiding citizen and honest journalist, but turns out to be a greedy careerist.
Sorry, Stanley, but you really are a great guy. I just can't lose my condo. You know how hard it is to find an apartment in this city.
Casting. In the early stages of production, the studio considered Matthew Broderick for the lead role, but never approached him with an offer. Then, Chuck Russell suggested Steve Martin, but he was deemed too expensive. Other candidates who were rejected for various reasons included Rick Moranis, Martin Short, Nicolas Cage, Keanu Reeves, Robin Williams, and others. Will Ferrell declined the role himself. Ultimately, studio representatives watched clips from the sketch show in living color featuring Jim Carrey and decided he was perfect for the role of Stanley. The character was specially rewritten for the actor, and Carrey noticed this. He told the director, "I feel like this was written for me." This solidified the film's genre as a cheeky family comedy.
Cigarette? Nope.
Incidentally, what attracted Jim the most to the project was that the main character, like him, was a huge cartoon fan. This led to the decision that when Stanley becomes the Mask, he would imitate various cartoon characters. The film featured nods to characters like Taz from Looney Tunes, Bugs Bunny, and Pepe Le Pew. Bob Shea, the head of New Line Cinema, envisioned Tina Carlisle with curves like Jessica Rabbit's. So, the first candidates were Vanessa Williams, Anna Nicole Smith, and Jerry Ryan. Other actresses considered included Gwyneth Paltrow, Winona Ryder, Alicia Silverstone, Uma Thurman, Alyssa Milano, and more. Although Vanessa Williams wasn't cast as Tina, she recorded the song "You Will Be My Baby," which plays at the end of the film. Chuck Russell ultimately chose Cameron Diaz, for whom the role of Tina became her debut. Due to her lack of acting experience, the studio was reluctant to work with Diaz, but the director insisted, even threatening to leave the project if she wasn't cast. During heated debates, Diaz auditioned 12 times and was finally approved just 7 days before filming began. Russell instructed the costume designers to create the tightest fitting dresses with plunging necklines for Tina, and in the film, another actress, Susan Boyd, sings for Diaz. Interestingly, the choice of Cameron for the role, as with Jim Carrey, influenced the character's personality. Tina was initially intended to be a bad girl, pretending to be good, but she ended up being portrayed as genuinely good. For the role of Lieutenant Mitch Kellaway, Richard Gere, Warren Beatty, John Hurd, Tim Allen, and Pierce Brosnan were considered, but Peter Regert ultimately got the role. Interestingly, Lance Kinsey was a candidate for the role of Mitch's partner, Detective Doyle. However, he felt that the character was too similar to his role as Sergeant Carl Proctor from Police Academy. Musician Gary Kemp was considered for the role of Dorian Tyrell, but declined in favor of Magic Hunter. Other candidates included Jack Nicholson, Willem Dafoe, Robert De Niro, Rupert Everett, and others, but Peter Green was ultimately chosen. And one more fun casting fact: the dog chosen to play Milo was named Max. Interestingly, this was also the name of Jim Carrey's character's dog in the 2000 film, How the Grinch Stole Christmas.
You stay here and be a good boy. Daddy's gonna have to go kick some ass.
The filming process. The movie was filmed entirely in Los Angeles, where all the preparatory work was also done. Visual effects are crucial in The Mask, so rehearsals were initially recorded on video, and then specialists worked on Jim Carrey's appearance. However, the studio was hesitant to invest heavily in special effects since Carrey wasn't yet a recognized star. Fortunately, the creators lucked out with their lead actor. His movements and expressions were so flexible and cartoonish that there was no need to enhance them digitally, saving the studio an estimated $1 million in CGI. Initially, Carrey was supposed to wear a rubber mask, and oversized teeth would only be used in silent scenes. However, the mask obscured Jim's expressions, so they opted for makeup, which took several hours to apply daily. Carrey also adapted to the teeth, adding a unique eccentricity to his character.
This guy's incorrigible.
In developing his character, Carrey drew inspiration from his father and his father's friend, who were unusually lively adults. The mask's yellow suit was a nod to Jim's mother, who sewed him a similar suit for his early auditions. Physical effects were used for added realism. For example, in the first transformation scene, the chaos on set was created physically, while computer animation was used for shots of the mask enveloping his head. The swirling effect took time to develop, ultimately inspired by a doll spinning on a drill bit. The scene was filmed by having Jim Carrey spin, exit the frame, and then his movements were picked up by 3D animators. To change the character's outfit, Carrey was filmed against a blue screen, and the footage was then integrated into the whirlwind, with rings visualized around a simplified 3D model of Carrey with varying transparency and refractions. The hallway jumping scene also involved a 3D model, and a stuntman replaced Carrey for the window jump. To create the flattened figure after the fall, the actor was photographed from both front and profile angles. Surprisingly, the most challenging part of the first transformation scene was animating the balloon turning into a machine gun. In the same scene, the moment where the character pulls out a used condom from his pocket and says,
Now. Sorry, wrong pocket.
was improvised. Many of Jim's lines as The Mask were improvised. Scenes with the dog also included spontaneous moments, such as when Milo refuses to release the frisbee, or Carrey's on-the-spot disappointed reaction when Milo fails to climb the wall.
Come on, Milo. Put some effort into it.
The idea of blowing a heart-shaped smoke ring and shooting an arrow through it in the park was also Carrey's, but executed by animators. The movie contains numerous references to other films and real events. The first line Dorian speaks after donning the mask echoes Freddy Krueger's words in another Russell film, A Nightmare on Elm Street 3 Dream Warriors.
What a rush.
The line,
You love me! You really love me!
parodies Sally Field's famous acceptance speech at the 1985 Oscars. During the arrest scene, the line,
No, it wasn't me. It was the one-armed man.
references The Fugitive and
Where's a camcorder when you need one?
alludes to the 1991 police beating of Rodney King, one of the first recorded incidents of this kind. In the same scene, while being frisked, the mask's pants were cut at the knee, so props could be handed up through the opening, hopefully avoiding the wrong pocket. The line Jim Carrey shouts during the nightclub shootout,
Now you have to ask yourself one question. Do I feel lucky?
references Dirty Harry from 1971. Part of the dance scene with the mask and Tina is reminiscent of performances by Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers, known for their unique dance scenes and frequent collaborations. Speaking of dances, Jim Carrey and Cameron Diaz performed most of their dance routine, with doubles only used for the most complex moves. Carrey performed the Cuban Pete number while sick with the flu. Producers suggested rescheduling the night shoot, but Carrey declined. However, the scene was almost cut due to concerns it was too long and not funny enough. But test audiences loved it, so it stayed. The parody scenes were also challenging, and Chuck Russell even threatened to keep Carrey on set until he perfected his Elvis impression. The director also encouraged Carrey to layer his impressions, such as portraying another actor impersonating Clint Eastwood. So that means Clint Eastwood squared. The trick of knocking a golf ball out of Dorian's mouth was done by a professional golfer. Peter Green, who played Dorian, was genuinely startled, and his scream in the film is real. Interestingly, all bank scenes featuring Stanley without the mask were filmed in one day and mostly in chronological order. The garage setting also had a cinematic history, as it was an unused fire station that had previously been a set for Ghostbusters. By the way, have you seen our channel's video on the making of that legendary comedy? If not, you're missing out. Returning to the mask and a few more curious details. When the main character first dons the mask, lightning flashes in the background, illuminating his skeleton for a split second. Blink and you'll miss it. If you look closely, you'll notice that the mask and Tina's outfits often coordinate. In their first dance scene, they match in color, with the mask in yellow and Tina in a golden mini dress. In their next shared scene, they're both in black and white. Finally, in the scene where the mask saves Tina by swallowing the bomb, both wear vertically striped outfits. From the start, subtle hints suggest Peggy Branty isn't as virtuous as she appears. In her first scenes, introducing herself to the police and then to Stanley, she gives conflicting details about her job. Moreover, when discussing the auto shop attack, she describes it as resembling mafia tactics, indicating her familiarity with the city's criminal underworld. While talking to Stanley at the bank, she mentions financial troubles that forced her to leave a good advice column job. Finally, she deliberately mimics Stanley's awkward behavior to gain his trust and manipulate him for her benefit. One last interesting point, after Dorian's line,
"This party's over in 10 minutes."
Exactly 10 minutes pass before the movie ends, although the explosion happens sooner. Movie mistakes and errors. Now, let's start counting the movie mistakes and errors in The Mask. But first, pause the video and make your prediction in the comments. Starting with the mistakes. At the beginning, when the diver discovers the chest, at least 24 stones lie on top. However, in the next shot, there are far fewer. Also, the chains on the pipe being lowered into the water change positions multiple times. When Tina wants to open a bank account, Stanley's tie suddenly flips over his left shoulder. When Dorian burns Nico's eyes on a photograph with a cigarette, he holds the photo differently in close-up and medium shots. In the auto shop, Stanley picks up a temporary car, a 1951 four-door Studebaker. However, the car that falls apart on the bridge looks slightly different from the one shown earlier. Just before this, near the club, a passing car splashes Stanley, leaving stains on his shirt and suit. But in the next scene on the bridge, the dirt magically disappears. When Stanley comes home after retrieving the mask from the river, he enters his apartment and sits on the couch with his pants perfectly dry and clean. After transforming into the mask, he jumps out a window, shattering the glass, but no shards fall to the ground. Similarly, when he shatters car windows with his horn, the glass disappears from the hood, and a mannequin is clearly visible in the car. During the dance scene with Tina, the mask's hat mysteriously vanishes, a shame as it suited Jim Carrey well. When Lieutenant Kellaway knocks on Stanley's door while he's asleep, the mask lies half on a red pillow and half on a green sheet. In the next shot, it shifts to the center of the pillow, only to return to its previous position. The mask may perform miracles, but he's also quick at adjusting his clothes. When he spins around a pole, his shirt untucks, but immediately tucks itself back in. When Tina hits one of Dorian's henchmen, a scratch appears on his cheek, but later disappears. Between these shots, we see Stanley lining the toilet seat with paper, which then disappears. A little earlier, his jacket also vanishes when he goes to the window to see the dog. The window bars even bend slightly as Stanley removes his hand. Dorian's limousine switches from a Cadillac to a Mercury as he catches Tina and they drive to the club. Milo grabs the mask by the chin, but lands holding it by the forehead. Immediately afterward, one of the henchmen grabs Milo by his back legs, standing on a blue and white floor, which becomes entirely white when Milo transforms into a cartoonish pit bull. When Stanley punches Dorian in the face, his tie is loosely knotted, but in subsequent shots, it suddenly tightens, though he had no time to adjust it. Later, during the shootout, Dorian's men fire at the mask hiding behind the bar. When they finish, the central henchman removes and drops an empty magazine twice. Then, we see the mask swallowing a bomb, and its red LED countdown timer becomes a black sticker with white numbers 0100, which makes no sense since the previous countdown was 006. In the final scene, the bridge where the characters stop appears high above the river when viewed from Stanley and Tina's angle. But when Charlie jumps into the river, the water is much closer. In one scene, a jar of peanut butter with a knife sticking out of it is visible, a subtle way the crew encouraged the dog to lick Jim Carrey's ear. Now for the factual errors. In The Mask, Loki is referred to as the god of evil, which is incorrect. He's the god of mischief, deceit, and cunning. Nonetheless, Loki's character is represented fairly accurately, with his dual nature mirrored in Stanley, the light side, and his rival, the dark side. Jim Carrey's Cuban Pete dance is called a rumba, though it's more like mambo or samba. At the beginning of this scene, black knee pads are visible under his white pants. When Dorian in the mask sucks in bullets, the casings remain attached, which shouldn't be the case. Occasionally, you can see a pink patch on the back of the mask covering Jim Carrey's hair. Furthermore, the actor's lip movements sometimes don't match the dialogue. For instance, Dorian's scream doesn't sync with his mouth when he's flushed into the fountain. Additionally, when Nico hits the golf ball, the display reads 163 yards, but the machine's voice says 205 yards.
205 yards.
Deleted scenes. The director's cut of The Mask includes 2 deleted scenes. The first scene is at the very beginning, showing Norse explorer Leif Erikson arriving in America to hide Loki's mask far from humanity. The second scene depicts Peggy Brandt's death in a printing press, which test audiences found too violent. There's also a known deleted scene where Charlie borrows money from Stanley to bribe the bouncer at the club entrance, but only Charlie is allowed in. This scene was likely cut to avoid portraying Stanley's friend in a negative light. Additionally, a conversation between Tina and Dorian after her first performance at the club was removed. In the original script, there was also a scene where Stanley encounters a street gang that steals his watch. Frustrated and exhausted, he returns home, where he faces his landlord, displeased by his late-night return. She asks if Stanley knows what time it is, and he replies, "Actually, no." This deleted part explains the mask's later confrontation with the gang. It was meant as payback for the stolen watch. Worldwide recognition. The Mask, with a budget of $23 million, grossed over $350 million worldwide, becoming the second most profitable superhero film at the time, after Batman. The Mask was nominated for an Academy Award for Best Visual Effects. It was also nominated by the British Academy in the same category, as well as for Best Makeup and Hair and Best Production Design. Among other accolades, the film earned Jim Carrey a Golden Globe nomination for Best Actor in a Comedy or Musical. Following this success, Carrey's career skyrocketed.
You were good, kid, real good. But as long as I'm around, you'll always be second best, see?
Interestingly, his fee for The Mask was only $450,000, or $540,000, according to some sources, because he had a modest portfolio at the time. He received the same amount for another hit, Ace Ventura, Pet Detective. But by the time Dumb and Dumber came around, the filmmakers had to pay him $7 million. Notably, The Mask remains the only comedy directed by Chuck Russell in his career. Meanwhile, in Mexico, a Coco Bongo Club was opened, owned by none other than Jim Carrey himself. Thanks to The Mask's success, an adapted children's cartoon series was created, and the comics shifted from violence toward humor. A sequel was planned, but Jim Carrey, wary after the disappointment of Ace Ventura's sequel, declined to participate, even for $10 million. In 2005, a sequel titled Son of the Mask was eventually made, but it was a major flop. In 2019, rumors circulated about a female version of The Mask, and Carrey has hinted he might consider a sequel if the script is good, though nothing concrete has been confirmed. Would you like to see a continuation of this iconic comedy?
Smoking!